Good morning to our audience from the Middle East and from all other regions joining us today. My name is Abeer Khedr, Head of Cybersecurity at the National Bank of Egypt. I'll be the moderator for today's session, and we will be discussing a topic that is not commonly tackled in many conferences because primarily it requires the involvement of many and more than one domain actually in cyber. And it sometimes becomes challenging to have all these stakeholders all present together. But we are lucky to have many of them represented in our panel today. Our topic will be on how to build a successful cyber power. But we will tackle topics like what is a cyber power and what criteria should we consider in building a comprehensive cyber power, and which key stakeholders play a role in elevating a country's cyber capabilities. Before we get into our exciting discussion today, let me first welcome our speakers in the panel who are pioneers, each in her own domain, and who will be bringing us a lot of insights to learn from. Welcome, ladies, and can you please introduce yourselves to our audience today? Maybe we start with you, Dr. Amal.
Yes, sure. Good morning, everyone. This is Dr. Alrayes. I'm an assistant professor in the Department of Information System at the University of Bahrain. I do have more than 20 years of IT experience in the academia, and also I have more than 10 years of experience in teaching excellence and academic leadership. I have engaged in many of the quality assurance practices in higher education, and I recently became a fellow with the UK GCSE Women in Cybersecurity program, and very proud as well to be accredited as certified innovation leader and a fellow in the Institute of Innovation and Knowledge Exchange in UK. I'm very happy to join you today and to elaborate on the topic. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Amal. Marjo?
Yes, good morning, everyone, or hello, wherever you are. My name is Marjo Baayan, and I am director of the Global Forum on Cyber Expertise Secretariat. The GFCE, as we call it short, is currently the leading platform for cyber capacity building. And I have experience basically in the latter part of cyber capacity building. I come from an international corporation. I have 25 years of experience in international corporation projects, of which the last 7 years within the GFCE, working more on cyber capacity building. Thank you.
Thank you. Miriam?
Hi, good morning, everybody, and thank you so much for inviting me onto this panel. It's a really great topic. So my name is Miriam Howe. My background is in cybersecurity. I have about 20 years experience working primarily in sort of government organizations and enterprises on traditional information security and cybersecurity. The last 5 years or so, I've been focusing more on national security systems and international cyber capacity building. So very interested in the topic of national capacities and international collaboration, and of course on cyber power. So thanks very much for inviting me, and very excited about the discussion.
Thank you. We're all excited too. Last but not least, Melanie, please go ahead.
Good morning, everyone, and hello, and thank you so much for having me, and super excited to be part of this really illustrious panel. I'm Dr. Melanie Garson. I'm an associate professor in the Department of Political Science in University College London, where I teach about cyber and the future of conflict in the digital age, as well as international negotiation. But for most of my time is actually taken up now as the cyber policy lead and the head of the Internet Policy Unit at the Tony Blair Institute for Global Change, where we're about 500 people globally across 20 offices across the world. And I work with our offices located in those countries on issues related to improving cyber posture, and also on tech geopolitics and the role of embedding tech into foreign policy for those countries. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Melanie. Thank you very much. And thank you all, ladies. I'm really honored to be with you on this panel with all the amazing, accomplished ladies we have here today. So now, by way of introduction to our topic, the Belfer Center of Harvard Kennedy School released last month the 2022 National Cyber Power Index, and it ranked 30 countries in terms of their cyber capabilities and intent. The United Nations ITU also regularly released the Global Cyber Index that also ranks countries in terms of their cyber capabilities. In light of these two main frameworks, let's start our discussion by first defining what is a cyber power? What constitutes a cyber power? So maybe Dr. Amal, you can start and by giving us the definition.
Yes, thank you, Abeer. I would like here to make it very simple and straightforward. And before stating one single statement about cyber power, we all living in an era where we have the technological development and the information revolution. And with all of this internet and the websites we are witnessing in this century, we do have a cyberspace and it becomes like a main element that impacting our life. So the ability to use this cyberspace to create an advantages and influence our daily events and operational that we are having across all the other instruments of power in our life, it would be the cyber power. So it is, in one statement, it is the effect of the online access on an individual ability to do something or get something done. As you mentioned, Abeer, about the National Cyber Power Index, I think they have defined the cyber power as the effective deployment of cyber capabilities by a state to achieve its national objectives. So we are all looking into having our countries in the list on that index. Thank you.
Yes, definitely. Thank you, Dr. Amal. Marjo, maybe you also have a perspective to add on the definition.
Yes, thank you. So I think the traditional understanding of cyber power is more of an offensive one. And while, of course, I acknowledge the traditional understanding, I would like to bring a different perspective because, in my opinion, cyber power can also be defined to the extent that a country has advanced its cyber resilience across various cyber capacities. So I think it's important here that a country has developed and advanced on multiple capacities and does not just focus on one single area. And the areas I'm referring to are often outlined in a country's national cybersecurity strategy. So besides the multiple capacities, I think another important element for cyber power is multi-stakeholder cooperation on a national level. It's not just the government that's responsible for a country's cyber resilience. There is a need for the private sector also for their expertise and, for example, civil society for the checks and balances. So this is what I would like to add as color to the definition of cyber power. Back to you.
Yes, thank you, Marjo. Definitely agree with you. And we will be tackling the importance of collaboration, not only between at the level of governments, but also with the civil society towards the end of our panel. But let us first, discuss why is it useful to measure cyber power? What do we benefit from this? And also, what are some of the challenges associated with this endeavor that we attempt to measure cyber power of countries? And what are your views on this? So maybe Dr. Melanie, you can share with us your opinion.
It is a challenging one, and all indices are challenging in the way that they can hit home and the way that they can be received. So on one level, it can act as a benchmark and it can act as an aspirational point for some countries. And depending on a very transparent index like the Belfer Center report has tried to do, it can give a space to be able to examine potential levers that countries can drive into to help get to the posture that they need. On the other hand, there is always a challenge of the type of data. Cyber power or cyber posture has national security implications. There's a very limited amount of available information. The ITU index is a self-reported index, so there's an interest not to necessarily give the information fully because countries don't want to be viewed negatively. By the same time, the Belfer index is primarily open source information, so a lot of it is a proxy indicator. So there's, on that level, there's a challenge on how it's received, and to the extent that there's also a danger that it doesn't dispirit countries and feel that the gap is so wide in some spaces that they can lose heart in trying to attain things. So it's an index always has to be, I think it's the interpretation and how it's then taken forward as to can it be transferred into levers, particularly in developing or emerging economies, emerging digital economies, as how this can be useful in building different sectoral advantage to get to where they need to be on the index.
Yes, definitely agree with you. There could be a lot of challenges because naturally getting to validate what is published about the cyber capabilities for a certain country is quite a challenge. And I heard actually one of the authors of the Cyber Power Index comment on this and say, that they had to start somewhere because people often wonder, they hear about the cyber powers, the US, Russia, China, but then people start wondering who's number 4, who's number 5, and they said we had to start somewhere. So maybe Miriam, you would like to add to this point as well?
Yeah, no, I really agree with everything that was just said. Interesting point about how it's interpreted and used, and I think one downside of any sort of ranking is the tendency to try and game the system and to try and play to the rankings rather than the intent behind it. Because I think particularly when the original NCPI came out in 2020, I thought it was very useful in gathering together lots of different objectives in cyberspace, which, as Marjo was just outlining, are actually completely different things. Offensive cyber is very different from commercial cyber capacity and export, and that is very different in ways from national cyber resilience. So they're all kind of different missions, and I think putting them together in the same place can be quite challenging in itself because they are very different, but it is very good as a starting point for just working out where you can get synergies, where you can get scale. And indeed, I think the Belfer did a really good job in creating some sort of structure around cyber power, even if the factors and the indices themselves are going to be tweaked over the next few years because it is very much an emerging concept. So I think as long as we bear with the fact that it is an evolving concept and we accept that there are limitations of data collection, as Melanie said, it is open source data. That means that there is some private data that is not going to be captured. And you look at some of the nations like who are commonly seen as one of the leading cyber powers, but they're quite far down in the ranks. And that's to do with the data that's available for capture. So I think it's on balance very useful to have these structures as a frame of thought for how we actually think about cyber power. And we just have to bear in mind there are limitations with any sort of index and rankings, which we just have to deal with.
Thank you. To bring our audience to be aligned with us on the report in case they have not read it. So let's quickly tell them what were the criteria that were used in the framework for the National Cyber Power Index. What were the capability criteria that they ranked the countries upon? So if you can quickly shed the light on this so that we align our audience with us. Who would like, to, yeah.
I know them fairly well. I might not get them all, so you have to help me out. But there's 8 factors. There used to be 7. There is national cyber resilience, which I think most of us would agree is the most important one. There's also foreign intelligence collection. There is offensive destructive capabilities. There is sort of commercial and industry factors. There is, anyone who's going to help me out? There's one around amassing wealth, largely from sort
this
of
one
cyber
was a
criminal
strange
activities.
one. I think this one was added in the 2022 report, right? And I was
it's
surprised
interesting,
to
isn't
see
it?
it because
Yeah,
because some people would, classify it actually under cyber crimes. Yeah, it's
exactly.
interesting.
It's controlling the information environment as well. That's one that's missing.
Yeah.
Yes.
I think the amassing wealth from financial wealth from cyber activities is very interesting, because it's the one thing that would probably not be, you wouldn't see any of that in a national cyber strategy, would you?
Yes,
it's the one of those ones that you probably wouldn't have an aspiration to do. But I think, again, I spoke to one of the authors about this, and I generally think it's better to include it as a reflection of that sort of activity that goes on, and the fact that certain nations do use that revenue to support its national interests. So it's better to capture that than not capture it, is my view.
Yes, there's also, I think, if any of the ladies would like to add any of the other criteria, because we'd also like to say if there's anything that's missing that we think should be added in the definition of cyber power capabilities. There's also, I think, the computer and technology advancement that is also measured, and the capacity building. Yes. Okay. Anyone would like to add before we move to our second point? Okay.
And I think the other one that was also about the diplomacy, having a voice at the table, the defining of cyber norms, and being involved. I think that was also one of the legs, and how that was information gathered.
And I think that's where the technology standards and the influence and collaboration of global tech standards sits as well, because that's a really important one, especially at the moment.
Yes. All right. So considering the diversity of factors that we have just discussed and the criteria that make up the definition of cyber power according to the index, it really becomes apparent that several stakeholders within a country need to collaborate and work in harmony and synchronization to elevate the overall country cyber capabilities and to ensure that they meet actually the national objectives, as Dr. Amal highlighted earlier. We are lucky today, of course, to have you all ladies representing several domains on our panel: the cyber policy side, the cyber capability building side, academia, research. So considering where you come from, please elaborate to our audience today on how you contribute to one of the factors or criteria of the framework. So maybe we can start by academia first, Dr. Amal.
Yes, sure. I think coming from this sector, the educational sector, we are here talking about the educational. So I would say awareness and educating people to build the capacity and the capabilities of the country is very important. And this is where we are working on it. So having a number of students graduating and skilled, having all the technical skills they would need for the labor growth, and also not only about educating the student. From another angle, we have the researchers doing some research in the area of cyber security and cyber power, and the development of the research that could help in different fields, not only cybersecurity programs, but we do have also some other programs like the computer science, engineering department who are looking also into this field. I think all of this could work together to improve and help the economic of the countries and the informational infrastructure of the countries. I would also agree with Marjo when she said there should be a very strong relationship between all the sectors. So here in the educational sector, we're not only working with the public, but also with the private sectors, setting some workshops and bringing some speakers as practitioners to talk to our students and to our researchers and doing some granted research into this area. I think this is in a brief what we are doing in the academia.
Thank you very much, Dr. Amal. And do you see any other areas, initiatives where more collaboration is needed with other stakeholders in the ecosystem?
I think
any
in
other
terms
particular
of
areas that
I think in
yes.
terms of research, this need to be enhanced and improved. Talking to my region, yeah, this needs to work it out, and we need to do more research into this field.
Okay, thank you very much. Marjo, perhaps you give us also your perspective on how you contribute from the domain you come from where you come from, towards building cyber power. And any other areas, that you see that are, under tackled in terms of collaboration between the different stakeholders in the ecosystem.
Sure. Yes, of course. So the Global Forum on Cyber Expertise, the platform that I'm working for and facilitating, that is in itself a multi-stakeholder platform that strengthens global coordination and collaboration on cyber capacity building. And we have a community of over 170 members and partners, and we aim to connect the needs and the resources and expertise by making practical knowledge available to the global community, not only the GFCE community, but to the global community. And one of the ways that the GFCE community interacts with each other is through its thematic working groups. So these working groups are the driving force to coordinate and improve global cyber capacity building efforts. And they're thematic working groups. You have to think, for example, about strategy and policy, cybercrime, culture and skills, standards. And these are very similar to the topics examined in the frameworks that were discussed. So the themes are core cybersecurity capacities that each country should have to advance its national cyber resilience. And within the GFCE, our members and partners have the opportunity also to share expertise and lessons learned, which I think is very important. So recognizing that cyber capacity building can never be a one-size-fits-all model, and that tailored assistance to the local context is a determinant of successful capacity building projects, we also seek to be a capacity building clearinghouse. So through this clearinghouse mechanism, the GFCE plays a matchmaking role to effectively match country, private sector, and civil society donors and implementers that can provide also the key capacity building services with countries that request assistance. So to answer the first half, very, very short, through this matchmaking function and the thematic working groups, we support countries with building their cyber capacities, and therefore we are increasing their cyber power. When we move to the second part of the question, I think the key to successful cyber capacity building is that different stakeholders need to collaborate with each other. So each actor has its own role to play. And what I see in practice is that luckily there is in general a good awareness of the importance of this multi-stakeholder cooperation. Hardly any questions are asked. And that is also visible in the different assessment frameworks that is included as important. But there is still room for improvement, of course, as with anything regarding this stakeholder collaboration. First of all, the demand-driven approach in cyber capacity building activities needs to be underlined. Projects need to be based on national needs and priorities, and it's important to involve the local stakeholders. And often we see that there is still a tendency that projects are based on a supply-driven approach. For example, the type of funding available from a potential donor, or the type of guide or implementer that they prefer, but might not be necessarily the match for the recipient's needs. So besides that, demand-driven is key. I think secondly, keeping up with the new developments is also important. I mean, cyberspace and cybersecurity change, and they develop at a rapid pace, causing new threats and challenges. But it also brings new opportunities and solutions. It is essential that new and different collaborations are being sought to ensure that the right stakeholders are involved. So I could go on and on. I'm very enthusiastic. As you could see, there's a lot of improvement, a lot of work to be done, but I will leave it at that to give the others an opportunity. Back to you.
Thank you very much. And yes, maybe the things to improve, the room for improvement needs a lot of focus that we need to pay attention to. Dr. Melanie, what's your input?
Well, I sort of wear my two hats, so sort of resonating on the academic side, but also as on the organization, and as with TBI as a member of the GFCE now. But on the academic side, one thing I'm really passionate about is the perception, and I teach in political science, that cyber only needs technicians, and cyber policy, sort of, or cybersecurity just needs a technical aspect, and really trying to widen and open that space that it requires all level of the spectrum to gather to deal with this problem. And that includes bringing people from the arts and people from economics and people into that big network thinking to deal with a global threat. And, you know, and taking students to things like the Atlantic Council Cyber 912 competition, where we really get sort of teams of students from varied backgrounds to put their heads together alongside, so that it's not just a technical problem, this is a wider problem. So on the academic side, I think that's really important, into expanding that capability base, that breaking that perception that it's only computer scientists and technical people that are required in the cyber policy dialogue. In the TBI side, we work on a number of projects. We have offices across a number of emerging digital economies. We get very direct requests on working on helping to build model cyber strategies, very much influenced by the UK one, which has sort of reflected some of the pillars of the Belfer Centre has talked about in there, sort of looking at cyber resilience and technological advantage and leadership and countering threats as all part of the picture that you need to build to fully engage in the arena. And as well as our project on tech forward foreign policy, about helping countries realize that tech now has to be embedded into every aspect of foreign policy to really, and to understand also where cybersecurity includes having that visual, as Baayan related to, on the technical standards. And it's not just about the fighting the immediate threat, but the larger internet ecosystem as a whole. I could talk about all that for a long time, but I think what's missing, and sort of what I'm encountering a lot, and particularly in relation to what we've seen in the last few months since February, is there's still a perception that only certain countries are at risk. And we have the strong countries, so even in relation to the post-Ukraine context, where certain countries put up their defenses, are able to put up their defenses, and countries think it doesn't apply to them. Countries that, like Costa Rica and like Albania, have ended up very vulnerable, and and all these countries are trying to rapidly digitalize, but their security angle there is not coming at the same rate, leading sort of that attacker arbitrage gap that leaves them really vulnerable. So I think there's still a big conversation that needs to be had to not scare countries into submission, but to make them aware that the digitalization on shaky foundation is creating more vulnerability potentially than gain. And I think there's a lot of work still to be done to sort of close that gap, both in understanding and practice. And as Marjo said, I could keep going, but I'll hand over to Miriam.
Yes, really, I agree with you on all those insights, particularly the speed of digitalization without backing it up with the strong cybersecurity capabilities. We see all the countries post-COVID accelerating their space for digital transformation, and irrespective of the capabilities in cyber security, and that's really a problem. And maybe, you know, at a global level, you see it more. So more work needs to be done on raising this awareness, definitely. So Miriam, can you please share your views also on this?
Yeah, I just on that last point, I was thinking about this before. It's totally understandable that, you know, the digital economy and digital transformation offers a lot of benefits in terms of development and growth and prosperity, and it's really important to be able to realize the benefits in sense of those economic incentives as well as security against threats. As I said, my background was in enterprise security. So this was working with corporations. And we had a lot of years where it was very difficult to escalate security to board level because it was seen as such a supporting function. And over the last 15 years or so, we've made a lot of progress in getting it to be a board level issue. And actually things like legislation and compliance has had a large part in that escalation, to the degree where it gets the appropriate funding, urgency that it used to. And I think that is still required at a national level, and it won't necessarily always be on the basis of very immediate threats. It may well be down to the opportunities to be gained from digital transformation and flow of data, which, as we've just been talking about, needs to be done in a way that plans in cyber hygiene in a way that it can scale, so that you're not always fighting on the back foot against threats and attacks. So I think it's a way that it's positioned to realize the benefits has to be sensitive to those different motivations. Just in terms of the questions, so where we in BAE Systems play, it's very much in the cyber resilience pillar, cybersecurity and resilience. We offer solutions and security advice into both organizations, companies, government departments, but also have quite an interest in the role of the centre, the coordinating central agency, which essentially is often implementing a strategy, is building up the capabilities for instant response, awareness, that sort of thing. So that's where we see most of our activity in this space, is advising on systems, technologies, and processes like information sharing and public-private partnership. As we keep saying, a lot of this is about collaboration, and there is a technical element to information, and there's a technical element to response as well. So that's kind of where we most contribute, I think. In terms of how we collaborate.
Enough collaboration? And do you see enough collaboration, or there is the need for more?
I think there's definitely, I see a lot of collaboration, but I see there is a lot of collaboration. There's a lot of intent. There are lots of challenges, right, in terms of, especially in information sharing networks, the readiness to share in terms of information that's available, that it's in the right format and the right classification to be shared. There's hesitations that exist that are probably more related to perhaps holding cards close, as in we're not ready to share, we're not ready to air our dirty laundry, to report that we've got vulnerabilities, etc. As opposed to it being actually to do with highly classified information. And quite often the two need to be segregated so that you can take an approach where you can declassify information and only share the bit that's needed to be useful to others, which doesn't need to have personal information. It quite often doesn't need to have exact victim information, but you can aggregate the threat intelligence that allows other organizations to make use of it. So I think that's one area where collaboration can still improve. Another area, I think, is in the collaboration between the legislative government and the private sector that is being legislated. to come up with legislation that is easily applicable. And I recently saw some work in the smart cities sector, which is fascinating at the moment because there's such a pace to it, and there's such a complex supplier ecosystem. I see that there's a large role for those industries, those industrial providers, in helping with the legislation, what is appropriate to legislate, what is not. And I think that should be absolutely a matter of partnership as opposed to legislation being laid down by the government and somehow interpreted by the public sector. I think getting the private sector in right at the beginning will make it a much smoother road to implementation.
Yes, agree. Thank you so much. And, our topic today is a heavy one, and it can open a lot of, there's a room for a lot of discussion. Actually, I hate to wrap up, but I think what you've shared, ladies, today has been very useful, very valuable insights. Thank you very much for sharing them and for having the time with us today. We look forward, of course, all of us, to additional collaboration between the different stakeholders in cyber to build and elevate cyber capabilities locally, regionally, and at a global level. Thanks again, and thanks to our audience for tuning in today, and hope you have found our session useful. Enjoy the rest of the conference and have a great day. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.